We got a talk from Ed Catmull to Pixar and Beyond. I've got a list of all his accolades here. There's just so many that are here, but I really enjoyed his Creativity Inc. book. I heard him give a talk about that at the Computer History Museum when that first came out. And anyway, I give you Ed Catmull.
Thank you, Brian. So actually, my talk's in two parts. The first one is this to, what's it called? To Pixar and Beyond. Actually, I'll stop at Pixar because Beyond goes too far. So I left Utah with this vision to make an animated film, and it took 20 years to finally get there. And I'll talk about the impact that Utah had on me, and about and the impact on thinking about creativity and culture. That'll be this afternoon when I talk. This time, I want to cover the 20-year period from a technical point of view, like how we got there, and do that in 10 minutes. Please excuse me for trying to stick to a script here. Believe me, I can go down a lot of rabbit holes. When I graduated, I had been taught to start with a hard problem and move step by step to uncover and solve the problems. And that's why I chose this particular hard problem, and that's what my passion was in. I immediately ran into a problem. Computer graphics was not considered to be an important part of computer science in other places. There were only 3 other universities where they had computer graphics programs, and in 2 of those, they weren't even in the computer science department. No one thought that this was a realistic goal, and I couldn't get a job. So I ended up working for a small CAD company outside of Boston. But then I got a call from the president of NYT on Long Island asking me to lead a computer graphics lab, which he was willing to fund. Dave Evans told him to call me. I accepted, of course, and my second hire was Alvy. He'd been at Xerox PARC, although curiously, they didn't think that color was an important part of the Office of the Future. So at NYT, we bought 2 RGB full-color frame buffers from Evans and Sutherland for $180,000 each. We had more graphics equipment for research than anyone else in the world. And we immediately engaged with the graphics community and attracted many great people. We tackled problems in 2D and 3D. Alvy wrote a full-color paint program. I wrote a 2D animation, or in-betweening program, as well as I wrote about 4 different 3D renderers. Now, for all the advances that this group did make in 4.5 years, we realized that we didn't have the people there who wanted to use the technology that we were developing. And we knew that we couldn't ultimately succeed this way. So when George Lucas approached and saying that he wanted to change the film industry, we jumped at it, and I took the position, and then the others waited, either there at New York Tech or, in Alvy's case, he went off to JPL, until I was given a budget to hire people. George wasn't technical, but he was the first person with credibility in the film industry who was willing to fund the development. In this case, and this is what he wanted, it meant developing systems for digital audio, for digital editing, and for computer graphics. Now, on the graphics side, the people at ILM were very friendly, but they were neutral about our research. They had extremely high standards. They were the best in the world at their craft. I mean, as you know, it was really pretty phenomenal. And if we could make something good, then they would use it. So we were strongly motivated to meet their standards. And ultimately, we did make some things that they felt could be used, and they did use them. And over time, of course, it completely changed the way they work, but it was really amazing to find that people actually had a clear understanding of what their real goals were and were not held back by the mastery of the craft that they had. They were quite willing to master a new craft. It made them a very special group. Now, when we were first at Lucasfilm, there was another company that was eager to make films, and they were much more secretive than we were. And in around 1982, they announced that they bought a Cray 1 supercomputer, which cost $10 million. So Alvy and I pulled out the paper, did the calculations, rough estimations, and based upon Moore's Law, then, well, excuse me, not based on Moore's Law, just based on the calculations, we figured we would need around 100 Cray 1 computers. And the cost of all these 100 computers would need to be 1/10 the cost of one of them. So now, based upon Moore's Law, we figured, okay, this is probably going to take about 14 or 15 years over the current rate. So we have a lot of problems to solve along the way. And it was interesting because that notion of using the rate of growth in computing power and the change in cost, you know, as a whole, was always a touchstone that we would go back to become more realistic about how we thought about the economics, what was possible and how long it might take, and how to use the time best to solve our problems. Lauren Carpenter, Rob Cook, and I started a project to rethink rendering. The state of the art at the time was around 40,000 polygons per picture, and we did a calculation based on what we thought a realistic looking image would take. That number we came up with was 80 million micropolygons, which meant that we'd have to have a completely different architecture, but we wanted that because it would force us to rethink how we did things rather than just extend what had been done. That program was called RAISE, for Render Everything You Ever Saw. And Tom Porter came up with the insight, which added motion blur. You know, it turns out to be very important for film projection. And then we used it in our first short film, Andre and Wally B. Then everything changed when George Lucas got a divorce. He got the company, she got the cash. So now he was cash poor, so he needed to spin us out and sell the group. Okay, not something we planned on, but so we went through this long process. Just around this time, Alan Kay had introduced us to Steve Jobs. And then Steve Jobs disappeared from the picture. We later learned out why. He was pushed out of Apple for reasons that are well known and pretty, and understandable. So Steve and I, Alvy and I went down to meet with Steve at his house in Redwood City, right?
Woodside.
Woodside, there we go. Whatever, it's in the South Bay. And Steve basically laid out a proposal, and it was we were going to be used as the seed to start a new computer company. That was not what we wanted. So we declined. And we went back through a very tense and hellacious year, continued to look for funding. And basically, it was all falling apart when, by coincidence, I ran into Steve at a SIGGRAPH conference, which was in San Francisco that year. And Steve doesn't normally go to these things, but because it was close, he came. So at this point, he was willing to now talk about acquiring Pixar, but more in line with what we wanted to do. Initially, we sold the high-end hardware that we had designed at Lucasfilm for processing film resolution. This is called the Pixar Image Computer. We sold into the medical market, intelligence community, and at Disney. None of us, as we started this company, had any experience with manufacturing, marketing, or selling high-end equipment, including Steve. This was an intense learning experience, and in the end, important for us. One of the important events was meeting Roy Disney Jr. He wanted to reinvigorate Disney Animation, including modernizing some of the processes, which led him to us. He came to Pixar to see what we could do. We just started as a company, and this was strongly aligned, of course, with what we wanted to do. Roy knew that his Uncle Walt adopted every new technology as it came out, and he believed it gave energy to the creative process, which is evidenced further by Walt's interest in Imagineering for the parks. Change was in the DNA of Walt, but it was not in the DNA of the company. And when he died, then, with the exception of Imagineering, they went downhill. This is what Roy was trying to reverse. He wanted to bring the spirit of technological change back to Disney. Meanwhile, since we're still in full-on startup mode, we had a lot of things to do. We did have the best renderer, so Jim Clark approached me and said, can we design an interface for the industry? So we organized a program where we had 19 companies come together to agree on an interface. Pat Hanrahan was the architect of this, and he was then at Pixar. And he has this remarkable ability to work with people, and also he's extremely smart. So this was the RenderMan interface. Now, while this is going on, we realized that we could not design new hardware that could keep us ahead of the advances in computing because of Moore's Law. So we sold the hardware business. We then ported the software we had written for Disney to SGI equipment, which by then was fast enough. Clearly, that decision to make it smooth transition for them played an important role in our future. We struggled then to sell software and to make commercials. But by 1990, with our increasing ability to make good-looking short films and commercials, and the decreasing cost of computing, we thought it would finally be possible, although a stretch, to make a half-hour TV special. Since Disney was on a run of very successful films, I was approached by the president of Disney Animation to make a feature film. This is when we were looking for somebody to do a half-hour special. And I said, well, we don't think we're quite ready to do a feature-length film, but we think we're ready to do a half-hour special. And he said, if you can do 30 minutes, you can do 75 minutes. And I thought about it for about 5 nanoseconds and said, you're right. So we entered into a contract with Disney in 1991. This is a significant year for us and for the industry. Terminator 2 came out that year with a silver liquid robot with ILM using RenderMan. This was a stunning effect. Then in 1993, Jurassic Park came out. So now the industry is starting to say, okay, something significant is happening here. And then in 1995, Toy Story came out. Of course, I read through the reviews. What made me proud was that almost all of the reviewers only spent 1 or 2 lines saying that it was done on the computer, and the rest of the review was about the movie. And the technology people at Pixar were just thrilled about this because it wasn't about the technology. It was about the story, and that was what it meant to arrive. This is about 13 years after Anali and I had made our rough estimate. The period of 91 to 95 was the pivot point for the entertainment industry. Now, it felt very fast for them, but for us, it was part of a 20-year journey. We started with a hard problem, hard challenge. We got great people, found support, and moved step by step to uncover and solve the problems. And that started here at Utah. Thank you.